Well, it's so good to be able to preach again. It's been quite some time for me for various different reasons, and so it's great to have you here in person, and it's great for you to be here online watching this service. Now, I want to tell you first of all is if you've been to my house, mine and Kathy's house, you will know that our favourite room in the house is the kitchen. Okay, and it's not just a kitchen; it's a kitchen diner. We've got a picture that should show up. Now, let me tell you why I love our kitchen diner. It's the centerpiece of our house, and it is a 1958 Californian Rye-Tin kitchen. It's the kitchen that probably many of you have thought, that was our childhood kitchen, we got rid of that. Well, me and Kathy love the element of the kind of the retro kitchen, and so we got this out on eBay in Devon, and we got someone to go and collect it for us. And it is absolutely beautiful. But I don't think that photo does it justice. You can't see the workmanship, the colour. So I brought our cupboard door with us. Yeah, I have brought a cupboard door with us. And let me explain now. Kathy was furious that I took this down. She's got angry eyes at me right now. So this cupboard door, well, why have I brought a cupboard door? Well, yeah, it's a good cupboard door. It's a good kitchen. But you know what? This is the favourite bit of the whole kitchen for me. Not because what's on the front, which you can see, is various different pieces of art, but the reason I absolutely love it is what's on the back. And on the back of it, it's a height chart. So we've got Eve when she was 2 months old, to 10 months old, to 2 years, 1 month. We've got Alice when she was 2 years, 3 months, up to 5 years. And so it's a measurement of the growth and progression. And that's why I love that cupboard door. You see, we're all accustomed to being measured, aren't we? We'll have all had our heights measured in a chart, but there's many other ways that we can actually be measured. And I want to look at some of those ways that you might have been measured yourself. We've got exams. We've all taken exams, regardless of our age, and the whole idea of exams was to set you up for the next stage of where you were going. And it all leads basically from school to GCSE to AS levels to college to university. The whole thing is it's progress being measured to take us to the next place. We've then got workplace assessments. I used to hate workplace assessments when I worked at a bank. It was stressful. But I'll tell you the good thing is when you had a good workplace assessment, what actually then happens is if you get graded well, you get a bonus. You get a bonus, and then it might lead to promotion. So the whole idea of having that assessment is it shows where you are, that you're getting better, and hopefully then it's going to help you progress. Another one, and this is not a fun one, but you have a checkup at the doctor. We all have checkups, but when there's a bad illness, like, when someone's got cancer, they have a checkup. And the doctor's checking to make sure that the cancer is being treated, then it's in remission, and that's the time to celebrate. But we keep having those checkups to make sure that the body is healthy. And so we can actually track the progress of the healing process. So these are all examples of us being measured. And whether you like them or not, all those are important. But you know what the most important measurement we actually have is our spiritual growth. And that is probably the one thing that, well, no one else checks that for us. It's down to us. And as a result, it might be a case that you've not checked it for a while. Have you measured your spiritual progress recently? Making spiritual progress is key in the Christian life. You see, what happens is when you get an update on your progress, you're laying down a spiritual marker to identify where you were at that time, what the growth is that you've had. And what you can then do is when we've had that growth, we can then see that over time of progressing on our journey with God. Because if you're anything like me, there'll be times where you think, I am nowhere, I am sinful, I am messed up. But then if you've tracked your growth, you can see actually, well, I might want to be in a much better place, but I have been progressing. And today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the book of Samuel. And what you'll find through the Old Testament, there is so many times where we see the Israelites tracking their progress, doing a spiritual review. And we're going to look at one particular example in Samuel, and we're going to watch a video that just brings us up to speed a little bit on where our story will begin.
So after Israel was rescued from slavery in Egypt, they made a covenant with God at Mount Sinai and eventually came into the Promised Land. And there Israel was supposed to be faithful to God and obey the covenant commands. Before the book of Samuel, Judges showed how Israel failed at that task big time. It was a period of moral chaos, and it showed Israel's need for wise, faithful leaders. The book of Samuel provides an answer to that need. The book of Samuel's story focuses on three main characters: the prophet Samuel, where the book gets its name, and then King Saul, and after that, King David. And all three of them transitioned Israel from a group of tribes ruled by judges into a unified kingdom ruled by King David in Jerusalem. Part 1 picks up from the chaos of the book of Judges, and we're introduced to a touching story about a woman named Hannah. And she's grieved because she has never been able to have children. And by God's grace, she finally has a son named Samuel. Samuel grows up and becomes a great prophet and leader for the people of Israel, at the same time that the Philistines rise to power as Israel's arch nemesis. And in this crucial battle, the Israelites get arrogant, and instead of praying and asking God for help, they trot out the Ark of the Covenant as this kind of magic trophy that will automatically grant them victory in battle. And so because of their arrogant presumption, God allows Israel to lose the battle, and the Ark is stolen. So the Philistines, they take the ark and they place it in the temple of their god, Dagon. And then the God of Israel defeats the Philistines and the god Dagon without an army by sending plagues on the people. And then the Philistines don't want the ark anymore, obviously, and they send it back to Israel.
Okay, so if you're like me, Samuel's probably got one of my favourite books in the Bible. It's just got those amazing stories that keep going and going. And what I want to do is fill a little bit of the gaps in that, because obviously that was a huge expanse of time that we've just whipped through. So, Samuel served under a Jewish high priest called Eli. And you'll probably remember Eli. Eli was the guy that when Samuel was called by God in the middle of the night, about age 12 or 13, he went to Eli, who was his master, or was kind of almost his mentor, and he kept going back, and in the end they realised it wasn't Eli calling him, it was God. Now, Eli had two sons called Phinehas and Hophni, and these guys were bad. They really were bad. They did not follow God at all. And they did not follow his directions. They violated his laws. Along with Eli, they would basically sort out the sacrifices that people were brought, and they completely abused the system, and they took the best of the meat before it got to God. They ended up sleeping with the women who worked at the doorways at the temple. And what happened was, all of this bad stuff that they were doing got back to Eli. And Eli had a tough job. First of all, they were his sons, and he needed to actually look at disciplining them as sons. But then as well is that he was the high priest, and they were priests under him. And he should have been extremely firm. In fact, based on what they were doing, it probably warranted a death sentence. But Eli didn't do that. Eli told them off, he rebuked them, but he didn't follow it up with any action. And as a result, we realise that Eli's heart was more connected with his sons than with God. And we know this because God sent a prophet to Eli to deliver a dire message, and that was regarding Eli's household. It says, "I will cut your strength short and the strength of your priestly house, so that no one will reach old age, and both your sons will die on the same day." Now, further on in the story, enter the Philistines. And I tell you what, it seems in the Old Testament, The Philistines and the Israelites, all they do was seem to fight. It was just one story after another, and so this is one of the many battles that were faced. And the Philistines, if you didn't know, are an ancient people listed in the records of those who descended from Noah's son, Ham, after the flood. So though we've got the Philistines coming against the Israelites, and Eli's sons lead the way in battle. But here's what they do, and they make a real mess of it. They go and get the Ark of the Covenant. What it was a wooden box covered in gold that housed the 2 stone tablets that held the 10 Commandments on them. What the Israelites did was that they thought, right, this is a holy object. No one was disagreeing with that. They thought, this is a holy object. We need to take this into battle, and this holy object will lead us to victory. But here's the thing that they completely missed. It wasn't that the object was holy and it was going to save them. It was what the object represented. It represented God. And here's the worst way they actually got it, is the Ark of the Covenant was in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And the high priest could only go there once a year. But what Hophnius and Phinehas, whatever they're called, the two of them did, was they went into that high place, the most holy of holies, and took out that Ark of the Covenant, completely disregarding and just breaking the importance of that room. And so they've got this box, they've completely got it the wrong way, and they're going into battle thinking this good luck charm will bring us victory. And it'll come as no surprise that they didn't get victory at all. In fact, they were slaughtered. Both the 2 brothers were killed on the same day, along with around 30,000 foot soldiers for Israel. And in addition, the ark was captured by the Philistines. And I wonder, well, why did the Philistines actually take it? Did they just want to kind of, get the gold off it? But here's what the Philistines did along with a lot of their neighbours, is they worshipped many gods. And so another god on the pile was only surely good for them. So they thought, right, this ark seems to have worked for the Israelites in the past, we'll have it, and it'll give us good luck. But little did they know it was nothing about luck, it was about the power of God. And so they'd never seen any power like this before, and it really started to mess them up. What God did was he sent plagues of frogs and the tumours, and people were getting ill and they were dying, and the Philistines moved it around to 2 other cities. And over 7 months they'd been in 3 cities, the ark, and many people had died, and so they thought, we need to get rid of this. And so what happened was when it was got rid of, that's where we come on to the next part of our story. And that's where we're going to look at 1 Samuel 7, verses 1 to 13. So the men of Kiriath-Jearim came to get the ark of the Lord. They took it to the hillside in the home of Abinadab and ordered Eleazar, his son, to be in charge of it. The ark remained in Kiriath-Jearim for a long time, 20 years in all. And during that time, all Israel mourned, because it seemed the Lord had abandoned them. Now, when the Lord abandoned his people, it was for a good reason that they turned their back on him. And what happened was when Hophnius and Phinehas had been killed, then Eli, when he heard the news, fell back off his chair and actually died. He broke his neck. Phinehas' wife went into labour. And so she was giving birth, but she died in childbirth. And just before she died, she named her son Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from Israel. That is a bad name. You don't come across many Ichabods. You've not got a good destiny if you've been called Ichabod. But at that stage, it was clear that the glory had departed from Israel. Now, Israel mourned for 20 years, and they were just gripped by this sense of loss. But here's what they did with the ark. They put it at Abinadab's house. But it was a bit like an unwanted box that you've tidied up your house, you've got stuff that you don't want to get rid of, but you know, you need to keep it, but you don't want it in your living room. And so they put it in a box and put it in the attic. They've forgot about it. They've abandoned it. And at this stage, after 20 years, where we've seen Samuel go from a 12-year-old being called, moving forward to being in his 30s, Samuel re-enters the picture. Samuel said to all the people of Israel, if you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, get rid of your foreign gods and your images of Ashtoreth. Turn your hearts to the Lord and obey him alone, then he will rescue you from the Philistines. So Samuel roused the people of Israel to action by saying if they were truly sorry, they needed to take action. They needed to do something about it. And we carry on. So the Israelites got rid of their images of Baal and Ashtoreth and worshipped only the Lord. Then Samuel told him, gather all of Israel at Mizpah, and I will praise the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah, and in a great ceremony drew water from a well and poured it out before the Lord. They also went without food all day and confessed that they had sinned against the Lord. It was at Mizpah that Samuel became Israel's judge. When the Philistine rulers heard that Israel had gathered at Mizpah, they mobilized their army and advanced, and the Israelites were badly frightened when they learned that the Philistines were approaching. Don't stop pleading with the Lord our God to save us from the Philistines, they begged Samuel. So Samuel took a young lamb and offered it to the Lord as a whole burnt offering. He pleaded with the Lord to help Israel, and the Lord answered him. Just as Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines arrived and attacked Israel. But the Lord spoke with a mighty voice of thunder from heaven that day, and the Philistines were thrown into such confusion that the Israelites defeated them, and the men of Israel chased them from Mizpah to a place below Beth-kar, slaughtering them all on the way. And this is the key verse now. This is the verse that comes at the end of the story that I'm going to just spend some minutes on. Samuel then took a large stone and placed it in between the towns of Mizpah and Jeshanah. He named it Ebenezer, for he said, up to this point, the Lord has helped us. Now, you've probably come across the word Ebenezer, and we're not talking about Ebenezer Scrooge from the Christmas Carol, but you might have come across the word Ebenezer from a famous hymn called Come Thy Fount. Or maybe you've read this part of the scripture yourself and you've thought, what is going on with Ebenezer? Like, what's Ebenezer? Now, as a side kind of note, if you come across something in the Bible or in church you don't understand, don't just forget about it. What you need to do is take some action to do some reading, learn about it, or ask someone else. Because there's such goodness in the Word of God that if just because it's not familiar with us, we just read over it or ignore it, we're going to miss really important parts of the Word. So Ebenezer is a word with power and importance. And like I said, I'm going to spend 5 or 10 minutes just to unpack its meaning and its significance. So, Ebenezer, it's a Hebrew word which means stone of help. Stone of help. And Samuel raised his Ebenezer because God is his. God is our stone of help. God was the solid one, was the rock that helped Samuel and the Israelites through the trials they faced against the Philistines at Mizpah. And so by setting up this stone, this Ebenezer stone, what happened was whenever the Israelites would go past this stone, they would be reminded that God is our stone of help. Now, if you're like me, we're all pretty fickle when it comes to our memory. When bad times come, we forget all the goodness. We could have come out the most amazing time of our lives. And then something bad happens, and then we completely forget the goodness that God has just brought us through. And so the whole idea of this Ebenezer stone and all the monuments they put throughout the Old Testament was to remind people of God's goodness. It was to make them stop so that when they were walking along, they could be reminded of the story. It's a bit like, if I was back in those days and I'm walking along with my daughters Alice and Eve, and Alice would say, Dad, what's this giant stone? And he said, well, let me tell you. This stone is when God powerfully moved and defeated the Philistines through thunder that completely confused them, and they were all slaughtered, and we had victory. And so it stops us to remind us and think through God's goodness. And you see, we need markers in our own lives, spiritual markers, to remind us the good that God has done for us. You see, sometimes we need to be reminded that the God that delivered us yesterday is the same God that can deliver us today. And sometimes the only way we can remember that is if we look back in our lives and see God at work, so that we can be reassured today that God is in control. Let me say that paragraph again, because that's the essence of this message. The same God that delivered us yesterday is the same God that can deliver us today. And sometimes the only way we can remember that is if we look back in our lives and see God at work, so we can be reassured today that God is in control. So we need to regularly rehearse these events in our minds and prayers, so that we can track our spiritual progression, how God has led us from one place to the next, to the next. See, we've all had hard times. But in those times when we look back, we can see God at work in those times. And how we've made it through only through God's strength.
Amen.
And that's why we raise an Ebenezer. It's to remember the grace that God bestowed on all of us on our journeys.
Hallelujah.
See, Ebenezer moments are the times when you know without a doubt that God has intervened in your life. Ebenezer moments are when you realise that God brought about circumstances and an outcome that you never could have done. He's brought you through, he's given you strength. And as I was writing this sermon, I was thinking back over my life at some of the Ebenezer moments of my life. And one moment that really really sunk home when I was looking at this was back in 2009 when I was 26, I had a real encounter with God. I was bored in my life. I was really bored. I'd been in a job as a school photographer that wasn't going anywhere, and I just lost my zeal for that job. I was in a church where I'd served in the same role for 4 years and felt like I'd learned everything, had done everything I could. I didn't have really many good friends, and I was lonely, and I was just miserable, and life just didn't seem to satisfy me anymore. I was bored, I was restless. And what happened was this unease just kept going. And so I went on holiday to Keswick to camp for a week. I don't like spending more than a few days on my own, but I went on my own because I didn't have many people to go with. Cue the violins for the sadness of my life. But anyway, as it was coming towards the end, I just had enough. I was just underwhelmed with my life. And there was this big hill opposite my campsite, and I took my camping chair and I set up my chair on this hill, and I said, God, I'm not moving from this point until you speak to me and direct me in terms of what I'm supposed to do, because I'm so uneasy. And I sat there for 2 hours. 2 hours before God spoke. I thought, how long am I going to be sitting here? And just as it started to rain, I was thinking, oh no, this isn't going the way I wanted. God spoke to me so clearly. He said, James, I'm going to direct you in the next week. That was it. He didn't give me anything else, but he said he's going to direct me. And so for me, that was the opening of steps that led to incredible things in the future. And so 5 days later, I was at like an 1830s getaway with my church, and I was listening to a sermon, and the preacher was talking about giving a year of your life to God to serve the church on the internship that they had. And bang, God hit me. God absolutely, spiritually just knocked me over. He said, James, I want you to do that. It meant giving up my job, giving up my salary, giving up my security, giving up my company car, my independence, and letting go of the control I had in my life. but I tell you what, I leaped at the chance. And in the year that followed, God showed me that He'd made me resourceful and creative. God called me to be a leader of people. He introduced me to Kathy, and a year later we were married. And God gave me a heart for mission, and 2 years later me and Kathy were serving on the mission field. And so that was an Ebenezer moment. I was low, and God just whacked me. And He just said, listen to me, God is good. I've got plans for you. Be patient. And so I think of that Ebenezer moment because there's many times now where when I'm kind of got this sense of, what's next? Or I don't know how I'm going to be able to sort the next steps out. Or just bad stuff happens and I start to think, I'm really not sure about the vision you've given me, God, about being in Liverpool and City Church. And then God will just remind me, just look back at those Ebenezer moments in your life.
That's right.
And so what I want to challenge you today with is, you need to do a spiritual health check to stop and look at the Ebenezer moments in your life. And maybe you've not actually thought through about those moments. Maybe you've not laid spiritual markers down. And what you need to do is you need to stop and start spending some time to look back and say, God, I need to reflect on how good you've been. And maybe that's a case of looking back and seeing, well, how and when did I accept Christ? I mean, that is an Ebenezer moment. What happened there and how did God change your life about? Maybe when you got baptized. Maybe when God gave you a clear picture for your life. Maybe you were going in the wrong direction and God spoke to you. These are Ebenezer moments that enable you to just get hold of God's goodness and be reminded of them. And now I'm not suggesting that you start to need to put in monuments up all the time. You know, you can't be kind of sticking, giant stone altars up. But there's lots of ways we can have altars, and that might be a case of your journal, jot those down. Or maybe to have, go out for a meal or celebrate on the anniversary when you gave your life to Christ or when you got baptized or when God really spoke to you, to actually celebrate and remember those times. And at this stage I've got a gift for you each, and Sue and Elaine are going to pass these out. And what these are is, I've got you your own Ebenezer Stone, okay? And on this stone it says, and it's our scripture from 1 Samuel 7:12, up to this point the Lord has helped us. Now maybe you're in a place where you're just thinking, gosh, I really feel God is distant and I feel as though I'm desperately in need of help. You may be desperately in need of help and you just need God to speak to you. You may be in a time where things are good, but actually you just need to reflect and look back and just be further reminded of the goodness. Maybe like, I think we've all been at different times of this lockdown, that you've got distracted. And actually God has drifted a little bit from the number one in your life to maybe a little bit creeping into number two. That you've been focused about the DIY. And as a result, God has been pushed aside while you've done your DIY. Yeah. Or you've been watching Netflix and series on TV and you spend more time watching telly and God has suffered. So this Ebenezer Stone is for you to reflect on. And I'm not really going to say much more than that because I want God to really speak to you about what your Ebenezer moments are. And this isn't something that's just going to be finished here. You're going to have to spend a bit more time as God opens up and speaks to you. And what you can do maybe at a later date is if you get the right kind of pen, you can write on the back of it. And maybe you need to write or draw a picture of an Ebenezer moment that God has brought for you. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to play that hymn that I was talking about before, Come Thy Fount. And so this is a 6-minute track, and what I want you to do as you listen, you might want to hold the stone in your hand, is just pray through that. Up to this point, the Lord has helped us. The Lord has helped me. And let God just speak to your heart and direct you what you need to be reminded about at this time.
every blessing. Tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mountain fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm coming, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. To grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. All else I adore your name. Above all else, tune my heart to sing your praise. Above all else, I adore your name. Above all else, tune my heart to sing your praise. Above all else, I adore your name. Above all else, tune my heart to sing your praise. Above all else, I adore your name. Above all else, tune my heart to sing your praise. The highest praise, the loudest praise, to the name above every prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above.